having a conversation with my husband. We had just put our son to bed. And in the middle of our conversation, mid sentence, I was like, honey, hold that thought. In a matter of 30 minutes, Nicole, I had 3 pages of information filled back, front and back of notebook paper. And I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? I mean, I can't even explain the feeling. That next day, I had my police physical, and I told my captain, I said, I need to take the rest of the day off. And I went and registered the organization because all of that was given to me the night before. I talked to my sister-in-law about it. We're very close. And hands down, she was like, I'm in. I want to be a part of that. And we have literally hit the ground running with this organization because, God placed people in your lives for a reason. And at that moment, I knew that we were going to be able to make a difference in our community.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there's so many nuggets there. So the first thing that I see in that story is that God sends angels to give us a message.
Absolutely.
And he can speak through all kinds of mediums, but we just have to listen. I see another nugget there that not only did he speak, and not only did you hear him, because I think we hear him, but then there's the lack of action for a lot of people. And we know that the word of God says that faith without works is dead. And you put the action to it immediately, right away. And so that's powerful in and of itself. So talk a little bit about some of the cases that have been success stories. I know we can't give names, but some of the success stories that you've had.
Well, what the work that we're doing, it really takes the full cooperation of law enforcement. It also takes the full cooperation of media. And what we always like to tell people is that less is more. Less of one race and more of everyone that's missing, greater the chances of a reunion. And so that theory was tested. For example, there was a young lady, a case that we were working out of New York. Law enforcement had completely dropped the ball, and that's where we come in, where I can talk to law enforcement, making sure that they're following up on things that need to be done on these cases. And so this young lady had been missing for 5.5 months. Her mother was on the edge. She was getting ready to have a mental breakdown.
Sure.
Of course, not knowing where your child is, if your child is hungry, if your child is cold. And so Natalie was working with our media partners, and she was able to get us on The View.
Wow.
To tell this young lady's story about her disappearance. And so when the show aired, it was a Friday in February. 15 minutes after that segment, we received a tip that led us to that young lady, and she was reunited with her mother that same evening.
Wow.
After being missing 5.5 months. So that just proves that the community efforts by people being vigilant, by putting the information out there and getting the cooperation of law enforcement have a great result for these families if we just pay attention.
Sure. That's very powerful.
And we had another young lady who was actually here in the district. She was missing for 6 months. She was 3 years old. She was here visiting her father. Her mother had sole custody, or joint custody, I should say, but he had like a 2-week visitation period. And when she dropped her daughter off, she come back to get her, and he had up and moved.
Wow.
And so that was a huge struggle where the Metropolitan Police Department contacted us and wanted us to assist. And I recall this evening driving down Route 50, if anyone knows about Maryland highways, and I was on my way to pick up my children, and I received a call from this mother, and she said she wanted to commit suicide. She had nothing else to live for. And I knew right then and there that her life was in my hands. She depended on me, and she depended on our organization to help her find her daughter. And I've never made a promise to anyone else. And I told her, I said, we're going to find your daughter. I told her, I said, just give me the opportunity. So Natalie and I worked with our partners to get her story aired on radio for her to do a plea. And she was reunited with her daughter that following week.
Wow.
And so that right there is some of the success stories that, I can just mention. Not all stories have happy endings, but we're helping to bring closure for those families. So since our inception in 2008, we launched the organization May 24th, 2008, which is the day before National Missing Children's Day. We have helped provide reunions or closure for over 135 families.
Wow.
And we still have a long way to go, but we have to celebrate those small victories. And since our inception, it's also worth mentioning that 1.2 million people of color have been reported missing. So we still have a lot, and we're really depending on our community. We're depending on law enforcement. We're depending on the media and the leadership within ourselves to
Yeah.
do something.
Yeah, and that's powerful. And so when we talk about wanting to help, provide some tips on how we can be vigilant in our communities, just how we can work together to keep not just our children but just anybody, because we know that human sex trafficking is huge in this area, and so we can talk about that after you answer this question. But just what are some of the things that you have seen or that you can provide for the community on what we can do to help?
It's very important to always have up-to-date recent photos, preferably headshots. It's so important. We need to know who we're looking at first and foremost. Communication